Welcome to Cycle Breakers and Moneymakers, a podcast for women of color and first gen who are breaking generational cycles and glass ceilings by going places no one before them has ever gone. I'm your host, leadership coach, and eldest daughter of immigrants, Mariela De La Mora. I left a 16-year marketing career to create a multiple six-figure-a-year coaching business as a single mom. Each week, you'll learn how to build unshakable self-trust, become in demand, lead with confidence, and make more money by being more of who you are. Hello, everyone. Okay, today is going to be such a timely, needed conversation. I'm so grateful to be speaking with my client Carmen, Aceves and iguez, about our current times and how we can show up for ourselves, for our communities, for one another, our work without burning out, with sustainability in mind. I'll tell you why Carmen is the perfect person for us to be speaking to. I'm just so grateful to be having this conversation in this moment. So I will introduce Carmen. She is a member of Reclamation Mastermind. Carmen is also a licensed psychotherapist. She is a certified leadership coach, systems change strategist, and consultant. As a queer first-gen Xicana, Carmen's work is deeply rooted in community organizing, racial justice, and systems change. She began her journey as a community organizer at just 14 years old and has spent over 30 years working across movements for immigrant rights, labor justice, LGBTQ advocacy, and leadership development. Her expertise bridges therapy, coaching, and organizational strategy, helping individuals and teams create change from the inside out. Carmen has partnered with institutions like UC Berkeley, the Xicana Latina Foundation, Power California, and the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, where she has coached and offered strategic support to leaders and organizations that are committed to justice. With her background in community mental health and leadership development, she believes that sustainable change requires both external action and internal deep personal healing. So I cannot wait for you all to hear her wisdom today, especially now. So welcome to the podcast, Carmen.
So glad to be here. And yeah, this conversation that we're going to have today is so alive right now in my heart and also in my physical being and my clients.
Yes. Yeah, you definitely, I was just thinking about how you have this perspective, not just of the now and the work that you are doing, not just from the therapy side, but from the coaching side, but also from the last several decades. So it's you have this bird's eye view of this being obviously this marathon, this ongoing movement for liberation, but also seeing what's kind of happening now. So I'm how do we even start this? I wanted to know, maybe tell me a little bit about the work that you've been doing now for social justice for the last 30 years. How does this time compare to past things that you've seen in anti-immigrant policies, attacks on racial justice? How does this time compare?
I think it's interesting I think it's an interesting question, because I think that when we attempt to compare what this looks like, we're also attempting to figure out what our response was, right? So this hasn't been the first time. This is not our first rodeo. It looks different. I grew up in the 80s during the Reagan administration, and my parents at that time were undocumented. And I grew up with a very visceral fear in my body that my parents would be deported, and wondering what would happen to our family, wondering if my brothers and I, who were born here, would go to Mexico with them, what we would do in Mexico, given that we had been born here and all we knew was here. My parents hadn't been able to go back to Mexico as they were in the process of, legalization. And so I think about that experience as something that is very much in my cellular memory, in my body. I feel it activating now, different circumstance in terms of my parents and their legal status, but of my clients, of the people that I work with in the communities that I'm mostly connected to. So I think about it as this is not the first time. And every time that something like this happens, whether it is this administration or Reagan's administration or any of the Bushes or even Obama, right? Because there was a lot of deportations during his administration, that it's an opportunity for us to fight back, to organize, and also to make space for the reality of the impact. and that the impact is felt in our physical bodies, right? Whether or not we are directly impacted. I'm hearing stories from folks like a recent client who, it was almost like a joke, but not really. She posted something on social media that she was going to now be walking around with her passport and her identification, even though she is a US citizen, because she has according to her, a thick accent and because of how she looks, right? So I think this is all contextual. And I think the thing that for me is a reminder is that the level of attack and repression corresponds with the level of advancement that we had. So this sort of intensity of coming out the gate so strongly with all of these executive orders that are attacking all kinds of communities, essentially, if you're anything but a white male, right? White supremacist agenda. And so there's a way in which we have to also contextualize it, that it's been in terms of the advances that we have had, in terms of the last, in terms of community organizing, that this is the backlash. Right? We've been advancing. And so the repression is hard. Like, it's almost like, let's put you back in your place.
Back in your place times 10 because you took too many steps forward. So now we're going to come back even harsher, more abrupt, stronger from every angle.
Right. Because this is a threat to white supremacy, right? This is an absolute threat to white supremacy in terms of numbers. People of color, there's a larger population of people of color than there is of white people, right? And so not that all white people are racist, and I hate that I have to say that, right? But the white supremacist ideas and idealists and legislation and policies and executive orders, all of those are intended to preserve an ideology that has been fought against, organized against, educated against, right? This is why we see things like attacks on DEI, attacks on anything that sounds like equity, that sounds like we're being subversive in terms of like educating people on like, the kind of books that they're reading.
Yeah. Anything that would say like either unites us, bridges the gap in knowledge, in power, anything that creates equity and awareness, it seems like. And that's why things that seem like they're not threatening are, in the sense that they make it so that 5 people cannot control 5,000. Because I always think about like, how does that actually happen in a society? How does such a minority of the population percentage wise create this sort of dynamic? And it has to be through like disempowering, severing, taking away power, removing resources, like all the things. And so, yeah, I can see how that is the case even stronger now, because it's almost like a stronger quote unquote course correction for white supremacy.
Yeah. And it's a power and wealth, right? So this particular administration, we see it even more clearly in the inauguration, who was sitting behind president-elect, right? So it's very evident it was white men who have a lot of money and influence, right?
Yeah. And so you were correct when I asked about like, okay, how does it compare? You're like, we're really looking at like, how did we do this in the past? And then kind of adding the context of there have been so many more advancements that like this time is different, in the sense that like what we're experiencing feels bigger and from multiple angles because of those advancements. What is it that you are seeing in the folks that you are supporting and working with, obviously to the degree that you can share, that feels different than what you have seen in the past in terms of like fears and things that are coming up, things that you're holding space for, things that you're helping people to navigate?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the individual level, so I have a private clinical practice and I also have a separate coaching and consulting business. And so across the board with individuals, I'm hearing, even before this administration started, I was hearing people say things like, I'm really thinking about self-deporting. These are for people who are documented, who are in the process still, right? Like who are here under the protection of DACA. Folks who are concerned about, even if you are a US citizen or you have a green card, or people who are concerned about what does this mean, right? So earlier today, I was on a coaching call with a client who was talking about how they're trying to figure out, like, unless things change in the midterms, right? Like there's going to, there's a desire for them to move out of the country because they don't want to be here for what's to come.
Yeah, I feel like this is the first time I've heard, even like you were saying with folks who are American citizens, I've been thinking about this as far as like my daughter and like, do I want to raise her here? Why am I fighting so hard to be in the San Francisco Bay Area where it's like, it's so expensive and you feel like you don't belong here? And then this is like, it's a privileged thing to say for some of us, like including myself, but I know that for some, it's like an actual, like, where do I feel safe? Where do I feel like I belong and I'm connected? It made me think as well just about like things I haven't seen, like what you mentioned earlier around the person who was like joking around like, I'm gonna carry my passport. My parents the other day, they were like, text your sisters right now and tell them that they should take a picture of their passport and keep it in their phone in case like they get asked. And I was like, I'm pretty sure we're not supposed to just show it. I don't think that I would want to do that. She's like, can you just text them, please? And I was like, no, let me talk to you guys about this. But it's like these things. And then they're asking about what's happening at the school. And so it's like a lot of like space holding as well for like our things, but then our families as well, with like knowing your rights and like, just helping the people around us who are also scared.
Yes. And I think that there's something really interesting that's happening right now too, which I don't think it's new this time around, but the use of fear, right? And
Mm,
intimidation, right? So
yes.
when people are in fear, we don't have our prefrontal cortex online. When we are scared, we are making decisions that are not based in, logical thinking, right? So one of the recommendations that, folks are making in terms of like knowing your rights and if you get pulled over is definitely don't run, right? So but what happens when you're in a fight or flight response? Your system is completely activated. You're not thinking and you want to get away, right? You want to run. So it's a very natural response to want to run from something that feels dangerous, right? So I think one of the things that is going to be really critical, and I've been having some somatic symptoms in the last several weeks, and I'm a very I have a sensitive constitution, and things show up in my body before I can sort of like process them and think through them in words. I've been having a really terrible sort of achy stomach for the last several weeks. One of the things that we need to do, we need to do collectively is individually making sure that we are strengthening ourselves, our physical being, our spiritual being, our emotional being, really regulating our nervous systems, doing things that help us stay grounded as possible, right? Because what we don't want to do is be in a state of panic and, making decisions that don't actually support us in the long run, right? That feel in the moment like we're just panicking.
Yeah. That actually answers one of the questions I was going to ask you around like how our people are exhausted, we're in fight or flight because that's what your body's supposed to do when it feels like it's under threat. It's actually doing its job. However, at the same time, like how do we show up and advocate for our communities and do the work that we need to do without burning out? And one of the things you had mentioned was like now really learning how to regulate your nervous system, how to sit and process emotion and things like that, because that's a lot of what's coming up. Yeah. What else would you say or like add to that as far as like how do we show up right now without burning out?
I definitely think that there's something also about the balance, striking a balance between being informed and spiraling or doom scrolling, right? Because I do think that on the one hand, like we don't want to be ignorant to what's happening or pretend like it's not going to impact us. I don't know anybody right now who doesn't know somebody if they are not specifically impacted. I don't know anybody who doesn't have someone in their like close circles that are not impacted, right? Whether it's work or family or friends. And so, as much as possible, reconnecting to ourselves and grounding in ourselves, but also taking the time to ensure that we're doing that with others, right? We co regulate in community, and that can be with your pets or with human beings. But I think it's really important to remember that in this moment, being as grounded as possible, I like to call in spirit guides, ancestors. We have a practice in our family of invoking the names of our recently departed ancestors, really grounding into that energy and that medicine as a way to, as a daily practice, right? As a, like, I'm someone who grew up Catholic and I am not religious anymore. I haven't practiced in a really, really long time. But I think about like when people are in trouble and they immediately like sort of call on God, right? I think about like we need to have that connection to universe, to source, to like our ancestors as a way to be in our physical bodies and to be really grounded, because the last thing we want to do and what they want is for us to be scared, right? Because the other thing that happens when we're scared is that we also if we played out the fight is running, right? Freeze. Freeze is that you literally don't do anything, right? That you don't respond, you don't protect yourself. And there are things that you can do to protect yourself and to be in community with
Yeah.
others.
I can also see how in a freeze response, I mean, I witness it in a different way as a coach because I'm not a therapist, but I'll see it where it will be almost like a retreating into self that will happen. That is also very common in like the child of immigrant communities because we weren't conditioned necessarily to allow ourselves to be seen when we didn't feel like we had it quote unquote together because we were like the strong person, the mediator for other people. And so like times that feel vulnerable and uncertain, it's almost like, well, if I don't know how to show up and I feel like I can't be of service to others, I'm just going to be quiet and like have a hard time and struggle silently. Like that's for sure something I've seen. Was wondering if that's, yeah, is that
Yeah,
something
and
you see?
I can definitely can lean more into freeze mode myself for all of the reasons that you just named. Child of immigrants, like only daughter, like do what you're supposed to do. And there are other times where I can be out of that space, right? My wife happens to be somebody who is not a freezer. She's like, respond, right? And she is thinking, and hers is more from a place of also hypervigilance, right? Like she's always thinking 10 steps ahead, right? And there's a wear and tear to that also. Neither of the responses are better than the other, but it does help when you have a combination, right? So like we balance each other out, and we do that in larger community also, right? And I think it's important to lean in on community, to check in on community, to ensure that, let's not assume that people know what they're supposed to be doing in this moment, to share information. I think, part of the benefit of social media is that, right? That people are so plugged in. And, it also has its negative sides because that's where a lot of doom scrolling happens. Like people end up on there for like hours at a time and they're, on the feed listening or watching things that are pretty horrific.
Yeah, I was thinking about that with like, what are some ways? Because you mentioned earlier around like regulating and connecting, but like doing that with others. And that can be family, it can be pets, it can be ancestors, like having a practice source, just like connection and friends. What about if somebody doesn't feel like they have that because maybe the people around them are scared or they're, the person that's trying to regulate for them and they feel like they're just holding it all right now and they don't have a place that they can go and actually be seen and held like themselves? What are some things that they can do so that they're not the one holding it?
First of all, everyone needs to have a person, a safe place. So that might be a therapist, right? That means someone you pay. That
Yeah,
might be a
true.
therapist, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm a therapist and I have a therapist, and I am so grateful for my therapist and I look forward to my sessions with my therapist because that is the space that I know that I can be unfiltered and held in a way that is different than a coaching space, that's different than my wife, that's different than my best friend, right? And so I think definitely, I think this is going to be a time probably where more people are going to be turning to therapy and other healing modalities. I definitely am a proponent of like there's a season for different kinds of healing. I think finding the thing that supports you. For some years now, I've been participating in something that's called entrainment that is done by a chiropractor, and it's nervous system regulation work. It's done on a table, face down, and there's light touch along the spinal cord. And it's been phenomenal for me. It's been the thing that helped me to recover from a couple of years of being sick with adrenal fatigue, right? So there's many different modalities. I think seeking them out and asking for support, I think everybody needs to have something that they're really leaning into right now.
Yeah, even if in like a good point that you made around like it likely is going to look different than it's been in the past, especially if for folks who have like gone to therapy and they were doing talk therapy and there's someone who like very much rationalizes and is very logical brain, we can almost like therapy to a point that it's like I'm so self-aware, but yeah, like my body still feels this way all the time. And like what does it look like for it to maybe be a season where you feel like you have to increase your capacity? And that's I wanted to actually ask you about that because this is, I can only really speak from my perspective, but like there are some times where I'm like, okay, do we ask ourselves to, we can have boundaries, we can have support, we can have things that either like we're asking ourselves to do less, but there may be sometimes ideally shorter term where we are actually having to like increase our capacity because we're in a season where we have to show up to like our jobs. Or I think about with entrepreneurs, we might be in a season where it's like, oh my gosh, if I slow down, then it's going to slow down my income. And, but like, yet I feel like I'm this full brimming cup and like I just don't have it in me. How can people navigate periods of time where they feel like I don't have a lot to give, but yet like I actually can't? I've done the things I can to kind of scale back like what I'm asking or doing boundaries or whatever, but I still actually have to show up. Like it's like a delicate balance. Like, what have you seen or like what this may even be more so from like the leader who has do this work because it's really important, or an entrepreneur who has to, has certain things they have to show up for.
Yeah. I like to think about that as like, this is temporary. We don't know. We know when it started. We don't know when it's going to end. I like to think about it and approach it as a season. So in this season, this is my strategy, right? So I think about like in this current season that I'm in now, post adrenal fatigue, my support system is still in treatment, a therapist, and less working with a naturopathic doctor. But when I was in the season, when I was not feeling well and when I was really depleted, adrenal fatigue is essentially your adrenal glands are overproducing cortisol. So my body was in a state of constant stress. And this was around the pandemic. And so the name to me sounds like it's like, oh, estás cansada. No, you're not tired. It's that literally it feels like you cannot recharge your battery, right? Like I would feel dizzy when I was standing in front of the stove cooking a meal. I would feel dizzy sitting behind the wheel. I would feel dizzy standing waiting for my kids to come out of school. It's a very exhausting, depleting feeling. So during that season, I had a naturopathic doctor. I went to an acupuncturist. I went back to therapy at that time. I was doing a whole bunch of different things. And yes, the investment in that, right? And I knew that it was temporary, that for a time, that's what I was doing. I'm not suggesting that people, and also I feel very privileged in saying that I could afford to do those things, right? I think that there's ways of approaching the way that we care for ourselves that can have more pouring into that doesn't have to be expensive. While also, I think the balance of that is being mindful of the inputs and the outputs, right? So, like, one of the things that I tell some of my leadership clients that are VPs and executives, right, when they're going through a very stressful time, it's a crunch period during their work. And so we talk about like, this is a time where you're going to constrict a little bit. And so you're going to constrict in terms of like what you allow in. So maybe you're taking a break from social media for a bit. Maybe you're taking a break from spending time with family members that have a lot of negative opinions about you. Maybe you're taking a break right now from, watching the news, the last thing that you do before you go to bed, right? So both paying attention to what we're consuming, what we're bringing into our systems, and also like this is a good opportunity to increase in a very small way, like what's a simple thing I can add on that would be really helpful for me, right? So maybe it's a helpful thing is that I need to drink more water, less coffee, or every time that I drink a cup of coffee, I drink a glass of water, right? Like how can we balance out that input and output so that it feels like we're nourishing ourselves a little bit more and we're also eliminating some of the things that take away from us energetically.
Yeah. You know what this makes me think about? I think in like analogies or, or images. And I think I'm constantly doing this dance with being a single parent where I'm just like, all right, well, there's some times where I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to get all this stuff done. And then like my daughter gets sick and then has a fever or like something where I was like, this is not my plan. And then there's two opposing forces, and that happens all the time, the business and parenthood and whatever. Or sometimes it's me. Like I went through a period of, that I'm still kind of in, like a depression and like ADHD burnout, where I felt like there's three different things and they're all, tugging, that it's almost, the image that comes to my head is like a budget where you have like a certain things that take you're spending emotional dollars or like energetic dollars. And that could be emotional, but it also could just be like exertion of energy. It could be like your thoughts, like executive function, where it's almost like, okay, we're going to go on a budget, like we're crunching down. And things that you maybe had capacity for, you all of a sudden are like, no, we're going to cut back on this line item. I'm literally like almost going through a budget and being like, we had it, but right now we're just going to cut back. So you start to be the one that's like, I'm not going to answer the phone if so-and-so calls, or I'm going to do these certain things. And because you're like, we've got to cut back and we have to figure out how to add more to the bank account. And sometimes that feels like there's three accounts and you're moving the stuff from account to account. So I just wanted to say that's what came up for me when you shared that, because sometimes that's how it feels.
Yeah, I'm totally into the metaphors. Like, I feel like every time that I'm in a session, there's like a metaphor to describe that session. The metaphor reminded me of one that was offered to me from the naturopathic doctor when I was first starting to see them. So you have to understand that during that time, like I felt so exhausted that it was hard to even just sit up. And I still needed to function, right? I still needed to get my kids to school. I needed to, and I have a partner. And, we have a lot that we share on our plate. The metaphor that was offered to me was that while I was recovering from it, that I needed to imagine that I had a savings account and I didn't have access to the checking account. That I needed to continue depositing into the savings account until I got to a certain place. And then I was able to access the checking account. And that was really hard, especially as you're sharing this. And I'm thinking about coaching clients that I have also who are like, but I have things to do. Yeah. And you're not going to get better if you were drawing from an empty vessel or an empty banking account. You're going to be bouncing checks. It's harder to recover from that. Then like, let's pump the brakes right now. Let's slow down right now. It's temporary, just for now. Just allow for that. And I think we have such a hard time with, and I've had that experience too, of like not feeling like you're falling behind, whether it's a timeline or it's like financial goals, right? Like, but slowing down enough, it's almost like I tell my clients that it's like a slingshot, like my brothers and I, we grew up with like using slingshots. And so, la resortera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My cousins and I too.
Right.
I feel like
Like
just
you
growing
have
up
to
with,
like pull
my
back,
boy cousins.
slingshot forward, right? Like there's many analogies like that, but like the idea that there is something really valuable, necessary, and important about slowing down, pulling back temporarily, right? Because you don't want to just hang out over here in the resortera back here, right? Like,
yeah. No, and I know that's so, it's like, as you're saying this, my body's like, oh, and I know how like that can be so hard, because it's almost like, okay, at least I've definitely been this person. I coach, through this, where it's like, okay, we're putting a little bit in the savings, and then like, okay, I feel good. And then you just want to like overdraw, because let's say it's 2 days. Let's say you're like, okay, 2 days I'm going to give myself. And then you're like, all right, I feel good. Let me just ask everything of day 3 now, because I feel good. And then we keep ourselves in this cycle. Whereas the analogy you said that your doctor said was, no, you can't actually take out until and this doesn't mean like, no, don't do anything, don't tend to any responsibilities, but that feels very different to say like, no, we're actually trying to get to a new level in the savings account. We're not trying to deposit for 2 days and then overdraw on day 3. That's so hard to do sometimes. And I feel like just noticing when your body, like this is like where nervous system regulation, it's like, no, that's the part that feels unsafe. That's like, no, we can't, like, we have to, I was about to use the word capitalize, but that's literally in capital. We have to capitalize on day 3 because we feel good, and we got to ask ourselves to do more.
Right. And we know what happened. We know that every time that we cheat ourselves of the process of slowing down, of healing,
cheat ourselves of the process,
of recuperating, we know that we cause more damage and we set ourselves back even further, right? It's like if you're trying to walk on a broken foot and you're like, okay, but I think I'm better now, so now I'm going to go out dancing. And then you really mess up your foot even further. And now your recovery was going to be 3 months and now it's going to be 9 months, right? But it's like, oh, but it was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Even to see it as a physical injury. Like I think that even now and thinking about not just like if you're exhausted or burnt out, but then also thinking about like our climate and our, our political climate and what's happening. It's like what much we're holding to say like, okay, if this is going to be a period like this, then how can we not walk on the broken foot? Meaning maybe it was something that we did to get by before, but we're in different times now, or at least in the interim. So what would it look like to not walk on the broken foot in this season?
Yeah, I think in this season we look back at history. The Black Panthers was born out of a time of repression, right? And so there was free, recently with the cuts in like Medicaid and also in like school food, lunches, breakfast, right? Like there was a time where that wasn't available, right? And so communities got together and they fed the children, right? And so I think there's lessons that I think that's why it's so powerful and I'm like, why are they banning books? What's the harm in reading books? Well, yeah, it's information. And so you can just look back and be like, oh, that wasn't that long ago. Oh, people were doing this. Oh, there was community gardens. Oh, there was share riding before Lyft and Uber. Like people were like giving each other rides and, making sure that they could get to where they were getting to, right? There was cooperatives where people were taking care of each other's children, where people were making sure that your neighbor had enough to eat, right? Like I think there's ways for us to take care of ourselves on the individual level, in our family level, certainly in the community level, right? And I think this is why also nonprofits are under attack, right? Like if you have, this recent client earlier today was talking about how they've been tracking the executive orders and, we're looking at the fact that now they're going to be changing something on their website to exclude all language about equity because they don't want their funding to be taken away. Well, here's the thing, like there has been other times where funding has been cut back or pulled back entirely. The reality is that there is going to be some organizations that are not going to survive. They're not going to make it for the next, maybe this year, 2 years from now. And also, there's been people who've been doing this work unpaid or not funded by the government for many, many years, right? And so there'll be some semblance of that, of people continuing to do the work, doing it subversively. I think also the big threat right now is that not only will we cut your funding if we don't like what's on your webpage or what what you stand for, but now we might take away your 501c3 status, right? So that's the big threat. So now we're going to eliminate you entirely.
Meaning taking away the nonprofit, like the status of being a nonprofit. Yeah. Removes, and which for folks who don't know what that would mean, would that mean taking away your access to things like grants and tax status and things like that?
Absolutely. So if you are a nonprofit, most nonprofits rely on a combination of funding. And there's another tangent we can go here, but even when I was organizing, the conversation was an old conversation about how we're funding nonprofits, because even if you're getting money from, let's say, a foundation that is, values aligned, the foundation still has an idea of what they want to have happen. What nonprofits tend to do is, let's align if you're smart, we're aligning what we do to their language, right? And not trying to create new work so that we can get funding and still do the real work we want to do, right? And so, yes, so now the threat is not just let's cut back on funding, but your entire status can be threatened, right? So now we eliminate the organization and, of course, people will continue doing this work, but it'll be much more difficult. And I think this is the season that we're coming into. We're coming into a season of, it's already hard. It's getting harder and it's going to be hard. And historically, people have organized. Historically, and even I'm thinking in terms of movies, right? Like we see movies where like people organize, like Hunger Games, right? It's like, so it's either all of us against each other, or we figure out like there's more of us than there is of them, right? So what are we going to do to take care of ourselves and also to fight back?
I was thinking about that around, there has to be like a tipping point. And if we think about history repeating itself with obviously different circumstances, I know that you can't say what's going to happen and all of that, but I mean, when we think about like history repeating itself and like how so many people, I almost feel like there's folks who knew or have seen history repeat itself, and then others, maybe younger generations, who are like seeing things almost for the first time, especially because, you know, when you think about like what we witnessed with Palestine and just seeing things that I don't think that we thought we would witness in our lifetime. Are you seeing us moving towards some sort of like almost like a collective shift of like tipping the scales of us realizing that we actually have more power, and like what does it mean for us to break this and to fight back? And like when we think of history, like what needs to happen, or do you see something is happening now because the dismantling and all of this, the awareness is shifting?
I think that the what's happening in Palestine is it's an amazing case study. It's a travesty. It's a genocide, right? Let's be clear about it. And people are resisting. People have resisted, right? People during the ceasefire are returning back to their homes that are no longer existent, right? And returning back with a desire and a hope to reconstruct, right? How? We don't know yet, right? But I think that there is a very strong human spirit when it is aligned with social justice values. When you know right from wrong, where you know that it's not just about yourself, but it's about the larger we community, all communities, right? When we understand that we are absolutely connected, that when they, when they come for, your neighbor and you don't say anything, they're going to come for you next, right? Like there's an understanding that as we are going through this, that I do fear, hope, I'm not sure which one, that there is going to be some kind of strong fighting back. And what happens when we fight back? There is going to be lots of casualties. And I can't imagine a world where human beings who care about justice are not going to fight back, because they do, and we have historically since the beginning of time. I also think that what's hard is that whatever happens in the next 2 to 4 years, too, with the midterm elections, even what happens, let's say in the midterm elections that there's a lot more Democrats that win office. We are a two-party system. Let's say that happens. The amount of damage that will have been accomplished between now and those 2 years is going to set us back to unprecedented times. I don't think that you and I, or even our children, maybe our children's children, are going to be able to see and sort of gain back a lot of the wins and progress that we had. And I'm not trying to be sort of, like a negative Nelly here, but in terms of just being realistic, that the harm that is happening right now is going to be felt for a really long time. And it's going to be really difficult to come back from that. It's not going to be fast. And we may not benefit from seeing that. And even if we don't benefit from seeing that, it is important that we realize that in the arc of our ancestors, right? Imagine if our ancestors said, well, I'm not going to be around for that. So,
Yeah, so I'm just going to dip out, like, good luck with that. And like you realize like this is the world that June, who's in the mastermind as well, I think she said like the world is not ours, like we inherit it from our descendants. And so we think of like we're borrowing it from our descendants, not inherit, we're borrowing it from our descendants, but thinking about like the work that we're doing and how an important part of it you mentioned earlier is like number one, realizing that it's the actions that we take now are affecting future generations, and not seeing ourselves as separate from other people who are also being affected through systemic oppression. So I think that whenever it's individuals seeing themselves as like, oh, well, now it's relevant to me, is it actually requires us saying we are them, like we are Palestine, or the Black Lives Matters is, we're seeing it here in, you know, mass deportation and all of this, like we're just seeing it's a different group that's being targeted, but that it's all part of a related umbrella. And when we can see that and we unite, then there's going to be a different impact than when everyone is just like, well, I'm sitting cozy.
I had the benefit of, when I came into organizing as a young person, as a teenager, I had the benefit of having done so through an organization that had a multiracial lens, that wasn't specifically a Latino organization or a Black organization, or, you know, the lens was multiracial, right? My first mentor, Kikanza Ramsey, is a Black woman, right? I've had many mentors since then. The idea was to connect our struggles, right? To have an understanding that we are more connected than we want to believe. Capitalism, individualism, right? The idea of that is like, you on your own can make it if you are smart, it's meritocracy, right? Like you earned it, right?
Oh yeah, by your individual merit and like you fighting for the same spot, like things like that, where it separates us from one another and makes people believe that they're like competing for like resources or the one spot.
Absolutely. The comments that were made about that recent plane crash that happened in DC, right? The helicopter, right? That it was the fault of DEI. Well, why was he saying that? Because the pilot was Latino from the airplane, right? And then there was a woman who was co-piloting the helicopter. So, like, blanket statements like that are, you know, let's just see them for what they are. They're white supremacist idealists, right? They're white supremacist ideas. What he's saying is basically, if a white person was piloting the plane and piloting the helicopter, it wouldn't have happened, right? So let's blame it on DEI. So DEI just means that we just put some like people of color, we met some quotas, right? The idea underlying that is that white people are smarter than people of color.
They're actually like naturally entitled to opportunities, and that they, when there are mistakes and or failures, that it's human versus like an intrinsic quality of your race not being as superior, which we really see. And we're seeing it all over like their pages, like social media pages and all. That's almost like this green lighting of just essentially like racist ideologies and just so many things that I know make us all feel unsafe. With that, I wanted to ask you, what is like one piece of advice that you would give to leaders of color, entrepreneurs, marginalized folks who are feeling hopeless, just overwhelmed right now?
I think it's time for us to stay connected. We need to remember where we come from. We need to remember our histories. We need to remember that we come from long lineages of organizing, of overcoming, and connect. This is not a time to be isolated, right? And I think
Yeah,
fear
yes,
fear can have
absolutely.
us do that, right? Like, I'm going to stay in my house, or I'm not going to go anywhere. But in particular for leaders, I think they need to be in more communication. Like, we can't have a strategy where it's like, well, we're going to protect ourselves and we'll see what happens to everybody else, right? Like, how can we pull either resources that are intellectual property, intellectual resources, actual resources, material resources, right? Like, how can we be in community to support one another, right? So that we don't all have to reinvent the wheel. We don't all have to do everything, right? Like, there's organizations who, you know, left and right have been putting out know your rights information, right? And we're seeing that it is successful, right? Like, there was just a clip recently on the news about, like, in some like right-wing media, about someone complaining, right? Like, these immigrants knowing their rights, they're making it difficult.
Mhm.
I'm like,
Yeah. It's only because you were trying to violate their rights, which
exactly.
is why you're mad. But it is that's how quick when you're in community, it's like someone has information and then they disseminate it to everyone else. Everyone else is safer as a result of being in community. And I think about how our communities or communities of color naturally are community based. Like, we didn't grow up and like our ancestors like off in one little village and another one is in another little village. Like, they were stronger together, and that we're just seeing that we're anchoring back into that during these times. But that's like our natural tendency to do that, is to be in community, whether that is physically like in the same place, but more so in communication
Yeah,
with.
and I think we also need to broaden our definition of community, right? That it can't just be race-based, ethnic-based, culture-based, right? Like, because we are intersectional beings, right? I'm a queer Chicana, so which community do I belong to, right? All of them. I belong to the queer community and I belong to the Chicana Latina community, right? So my children are neurodivergent, right? So that's part of our community also, right? So we need to broaden out our definition of community to be more expansive and inclusive, which is exactly what they don't want us to do, right? They don't want us to be banding together, right? Because there's a lot more of us who believe in justice, who believe in having for everyone, right? That it's not just for me. I'm not just out here trying to get for me. It's we think about in our culture in particular, we think about sending money back to our respective countries, right? Or even forget about sending money back, like money to our parents, right? Like I don't have an idea that I'm going to inherit money from my parents. I have an idea of like, oh, I'm going to support my parents when they get older, right? Like that's going to be not necessarily an expectation, although it can be, but it also has to be a choice, right? Like how you're going to be in community and in response.
Yeah. And I think of like how with a chain that has links, it's like even just having one that community can add just to whatever degree. It doesn't have to be related community. Like you said, it doesn't have to be same race. Just having that chain link to hold you down can make all the difference because it's just one layer to fall back on. It's almost like however many nets. That's why I see it. It's like community is like one net. If you fall in this direction, you've got a little net right here. And that in itself is what makes us more safe, connected, stable, able to be resilient and bounce back. Yeah, I love that. With that being said, we're going to have a second episode where we're going to talk about your experience in reclamation. But before we do that, I wanted to just leave with like, is there anything that you didn't get a chance to say that you want to say before we close out and before I ask folks like how can they learn more about you and be connected with you? Is there anything that you want to say?
Yeah, I think about the work that I do, whether it's under the category of clinical work or consulting or coaching. I think about it as like I show up for it. And part of how I show up for it and what I encourage whoever I'm sitting in front of is to consider that all of our experiences come with us, right? And so the coach that I am today, the therapist that I am today, are informed and made more beautiful and more resilient by my experience of being a daughter of immigrant, by my experience of growing up in a community that was surrounded by environmental pollution that led me to organizing work, by my experience of being a first person, not only to go to college, to go to elementary school, to go to middle school, to go to high school, right? That all of those experiences brought me to where I'm at today. And I really want to invite people to consider that our existence here doesn't begin at our birth and with our experiences, to expand beyond that and to consider also that we are part of a larger arc, ancestors and people who have come here before us. And so tapping into, especially during these times, and I would say daily, but especially during these times, tapping into the resources of where we come from, what makes us who we are, and also beyond ourselves, right? That we have ancestors, that we have spirit guides that we can connect to and help us to be more grounded as we do our daily work and also as we, move through these next very difficult years.
I think that's beautiful. And then it's not something that I personally thought about or tapped into until probably like a year or so ago. And it came through my own like somatic, therapist of realizing that like when you said we didn't just start here in like this lifetime, that we have ancestral support. And I know that for some that might be like, well, what does this mean? But it could just be like having photographs or having things that just remind you that like you are not alone and that you come from strength and resilience and love that took different forms. I know that we all have different like relationships with like our past and family and things like that, but yeah, I think that I just wanted to echo that back. Like I have a blanket that I bought in Sayulita in Mexico that I call like my ancestor blanket, just as it was like a blanket that I gave that intention that whenever I feel like things are heavy, I just wrap myself in the blanket, and it's just the symbolism I attach to it. So it could be as simple as that, something that reminds you of, ancestors or ancestral connection, that like it could be that blanket, and that could be your home or your safe space, to refuel you. So
yeah, here in our house, we have a year-round altar. So we don't just put it up during the, the Day of the Dead. We have it year round. And it has the photos. My mentor that I mentioned passed away last year, and her photo is on the altar now. I invoke her. I invoke my grandfather. I think another interesting way, and this may not be for everybody, but I've also been, I call myself a psychic whore. Since about the time that I started organizing in my early teens, I've also gone to psychic readers. And, they're not all created equal, but I have like a handful that I return to, maybe two or three. And one of those readings, my grandfather, it was with a medium. My grandfather came through my abuelito on my mom's side, my abuelito Hipolito. He just had a birthday recently. I got to see him about 6 months before he passed. And when I had the reading with him now a couple of years ago, the medium that I was working with mentioned to me that he was sharing how proud he was of me because of how far I have brought our lineage in terms of healing and in terms of even just monetarily, right? My grandfather, as well as my mom and dad, grew up in ranchitos without running water, without electricity, and that was their experience. And so mine is the first generation, and not all of my generation, because I have cousins who are still in Mexico. Most of them are now in pueblos with running water and electricity, but my family was the first here to experience something different. And thinking about like they didn't have access to education either, right? They didn't go to school, they didn't have that opportunity.
Yeah, you said like you were the first to go to every type of school, elementary, middle school, high school, like, graduating. That in itself is like the miracle of that change of what you were able to have and become and do in that one generation.
Yeah, and the fact that I didn't meet him until I was, because my parents weren't able to go back until I was about 13 or 14. As I'm saying that, I'm realizing that a lot of things happen around my 13, 14 years.
So I was going to say, you also got into social justice work at 14 as well. So it's like like an awakening there of like a part of your soul of like, this is bigger than me. And I have there's work that I want to do.
During that time there were so many, so many sort of like, I like to think about like 14 when I learned about organizing, and I fell into it by accident, right? It wasn't intentional. I didn't know about it, and I didn't think like, oh, I'm going to be an organizer. It was quite
I
accidental.
remember reading that in your intake form where I was like, wait, I'm like so excited to meet this person because I'm like, how, like just your history and like how early on you got into this work. But yes, continue.
Yeah, well, that experience was, I have to say, hands down, one of the most significant experiences of my life, because I learned to put words to things that I already felt. I learned to put words, labels to sexism and racism, environmental pollution, all of these words. I was learning about organizing from the experience of like, I have felt something and I don't know, and everybody is normalizing it, and I'm looking around and no one's saying anything about it, to like putting words to it, right? So it was a big sort of like awakening, consciousness awakening. And it was something that it was like I could not turn away from that anymore. Like I could not see the racism even in my family, right? Like my family is racist, right? And so in particular against like African American people, right? And so there was ways that I couldn't not look at that, right? And I couldn't not call out my family on that, even at that age, right? So that was an experience. And I think also meeting my Mexican family for the first time, right? So up until about 13, 14, my parents hadn't been able to go back. We go back to Mexico. For the longest time, I thought like, oh, like I'm going to get that experience of that extended Mexican family, right? Like there's like 13 and 14 uncles and aunts and uncles on each side of the family. Both of my parents have long, big families. They know each other since they were kids. They were in neighboring ranchitos. And I have this expectation, I'm going to go to Mexico and I'm going to feel like, I've been waiting to be home and to be with family. And then having the experience of realizing, oh, I'm not going to get that. And I'm not going to get that because I am la prima del norte, right? I don't have the experience and the relationship, the day-to-day lived experience of building with your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, right? I was a stranger to them, right? And I wasn't going to just fold in and feel like, oh, definitely they were very loving, very accepting, but there's very, very clear ways in which I felt like, oh, I'm of you, but I'm not one of you, right? And then also coming back and feeling that experience here of like, oh, but ni de aquí ni de allá, right? That experience. Or as Ansaldúa.
So there's always like a sense of grief. It's almost like with just being an immigrant descendant, there's always some sort of not fully feeling like you are fully represented or belong, and also a longing for something that you feel like you're missing. But then when you're there, you feel like you don't really fit in there. And this grief of like what you thought it was going to be like, or for lost time. I know that came up for me when I went to my dad's ranchito a month ago, of just like, there's just grief. And I know that it's connected to a lot of pain and things that like this romanticized version of my, things in your mind, it just like isn't that, but I can so see
that's
that.
separation. Yeah.
In the
And like coming back full circle, talking about like getting rid of books, banning books, right? It was a book that helped me conceptualize. It was Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands that helped me conceptualize this experience of being a Chicana, growing up in the US, having family in Mexico, and not belonging there and not belonging here, right? That sort of that rift.
I'm going to put that in the notes. Would that be a book you'd recommend for folks? Borderlands. With that being said, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to just close out with, how can folks connect with you, learn from you, and just find out more about your...
Yeah, I'm hiding. People can probably do a Google search. That's probably the easiest way. I'm on Instagram _Colibri Coaching.
It'll be in the show notes. We'll put that in there.
And also on LinkedIn, but I'm less and less on there. So,
and that's okay. You don't really need to be. And I think that that's an example sometimes that we need to see more of, especially as entrepreneurs, to just say like, there's different ways of being and living and doing business. So I'll ask you about that in the next one, but yes, we'll put in the show notes.
Sounds good.
Yes. Thank you so much, Carmen.
My pleasure.